In a cave in southern Siberia, in 2008, an excavation team lifted out a piece of bone smaller than a fingernail. It was the tip of a child's little finger. A fragment that small is not supposed to tell you anything. 4 years later, it had produced a genome as complete as one from a living person, and an entire branch of humanity nobody had suspected. No skull, no skeleton, no name. This is a kind of human we met as a molecule. Denisova Cave sits in the foothills of the Altai Mountains, in a limestone hillside that has been catching shelter seekers for 250,000 years. It is an unremarkable-looking place, a wide, arched mouth, a high chamber lit by a hole in the roof, galleries running back into the dark. What makes it unique on Earth is who slept in it. Genetic traces pulled straight out of the dirt put Denisovans there from roughly 250,000 years ago, Neanderthals arriving around 200,000, and modern humans by about 45,000. It is the only site known to have housed all three. The Denisova fingerbone is the least impressive object in paleoanthropology. It is the last joint of a fifth finger, from the right hand of a girl who died at about 13. It came out of a layer packed with animal bone and stone tools, so small and so plain that nobody could identify it by eye. Years later, researchers reunited two fragments of it and found its shape sits closer to a modern human finger than to a Neanderthal one. That is the quiet joke at the center of all this. The bone that revealed a new kind of human looks like nothing at all. Ancient bone is usually mostly bacteria. This one was not. More than 70% of the DNA in it was the girl's own extraordinary preservation, and the only reason the rest of this happened. The first result out of the laboratory was the mitochondrial genome, a small loop of DNA inherited down the maternal line. It was compared against present-day humans and against Neanderthals, and it matched neither. It carried nearly twice as many differences from living people as Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA does, tracing back to a common ancestor about 1 million years ago. It was not a Neanderthal and it was not us. A sequence is not a skeleton, and the difference decides everything that follows. There was no skull to measure, no jaw, no pelvis, no idea what these people looked like. What there was a genome. And a genome is not one individual. It carries the history of everyone that individual descends from. Paleontology had always run the other way round. Find the bones, describe the anatomy, then argue about where it belongs. Here the argument arrived first, and the anatomy was missing, so they were named after the cave, because there was nothing else to name them after. Denisovans, a people defined by their chemistry. Naming a species requires a specimen. Classification asks for a type. A physical individual, held in a collection, permanently attached to the name, with described features anyone can go and check. A fingertip with no diagnostic anatomy cannot do that job. Neither can a molar, which is what the cave produced next. So for the better part of 15 years, the Denisovans lived in a strange administrative limbo, discussed everywhere, cited in hundreds of papers, and technically nameless. Everyone called them Denisovans. It was a nickname, not a species. The nuclear genome changed the shape of the family tree and corrected the first answer. The mitochondrial result had suggested something very deep and very separate. Branching away around 1 million years back, but mitochondrial DNA is one lineage out of thousands, and it can mislead. The full genome placed the Denisovans as the sister group to the Neanderthals, two populations that split somewhere between 381,000 and 473,000 years ago, both from a lineage that had parted from ours earlier still. Not a distant cousin, the Neanderthals, closest relatives, and we had been looking straight past them. Calling the Denisovans a separate species means deciding what a species is, and our own genus refuses to cooperate. Denisovans interbred with Neanderthals. They interbred with the ancestors of people alive today. Their DNA is inside human beings walking around right now, which is not the behavior of a closed biological unit. So some researchers treat them as a distinct species, and others place the whole lot inside one broad and untidy human species. The disagreement is not about the evidence. It is about what the word is for. When two populations meet and have children, and those children have children, DNA crosses over and stays. Geneticists call it introgression. What it means is that a population can be extinct as a people and still present as a set of sequences, copied forward inside another population for tens of thousands of years. The Denisovans are gone. There have been none for something like 50,000 years. Their DNA is still being copied tonight, in cells dividing in living human bodies. They did not exactly die out, they were absorbed. Denisovan ancestry is not spread evenly across living people, and the pattern is the interesting part. Across mainland East and Southeast Asia, the contribution is real but tiny, a fraction of 1%. Move out into the Pacific and it climbs sharply. People in Papua New Guinea and Aboriginal Australians carry several percent of their genome from this population. And the record belongs somewhere almost nobody would look. The Ayta Magbukon of Luzon in the Philippines, who carry something like a third more again than Papuans and Australians do. The highest concentration on Earth is in island Southeast Asia. Denisovan bodies were found in Siberia. Denisovan DNA peaks in the tropics, thousands of kilometers away, across open water. Only one thing reconciles those two facts, because genes do not travel without bodies. For modern humans moving into island Southeast Asia and New Guinea to have picked up that much Denisovan ancestry, there had to be Denisovans there to meet, in numbers, over a long period. So the Siberian cave was never the homeland. It was the northern edge, the one corner cold enough to keep the DNA readable. The population spanned a continent. The Tibetan Plateau is the largest high-altitude landscape on the planet, and much of it sits above 4,000 meters. At that height, the air delivers roughly 40% less oxygen than at sea level. Bring an adult up from the lowlands, and the body thickens the blood, pushing out more red cells to carry more oxygen. It works, and over years it is dangerous. Thickened blood strains the heart, and in pregnancy, it is associated with restricted growth and lost pregnancies. By the ordinary physiology of our species, settling that high should be a losing proposition. Millions live there anyway. Tibetans do not thicken their blood at altitude. Their hemoglobin stays low, and they do better for it. The strongest signal of natural selection anywhere in the Tibetan genome sits on a gene called EPAS1, the master switch, governing how the body reacts to low oxygen. When researchers sequenced that stretch in Tibetans and in Han Chinese, the Tibetan version came back looking wrong. Far too different from every other human version to have arisen inside our species by ordinary mutation. So they went looking for what it did match. They found one thing: it was the Denisovan. In 1980, a monk meditating in Baixia Karst Cave, high on the northeastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau, at around 3,200 meters, found the right half of a heavy human lower jaw and handed it to the local religious authority. It went unstudied for decades. When it was finally examined, no DNA had survived, but proteins had, and they carried Denisovan variants. The jaw is at least 160,000 years old. It is the oldest human fossil known from the plateau, and it says Denisovans were living at that altitude long before our species arrived. A population adapted to thin air was living on the Tibetan Plateau for well over 100,000 years before modern humans reached it. Our species arrived later, met them, had children with them, and inherited the variant. Then selection did the rest. The version that keeps blood thin at altitude spread through the population that needed it, and today it is close to universal in Tibetans and almost absent everywhere else. A gene borrowed from a people with no name and no face is doing measurable work in living bodies. If films about the vanished world are your kind of thing, the Earth before is where they live. A bone fragment barely 2 centimeters long, pulled from the Denisova cave deposits, holds the most extraordinary single result in the field. It was found by screening thousands of unidentifiable scraps for human protein, then sequenced, and the sequence made no sense at first. Half of it looked Neanderthal. Half of it looked Denisovan, not patchily, the way it looks in a population that mixed long ago, but split almost exactly down the middle. Only one arrangement produces those numbers. A first-generation child. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan. She was another girl of about 13, and she died roughly 90,000 years ago. Only a handful of archaic individuals from Denisova cave have ever yielded usable genomes. One of that handful had parents from 2 different human populations. Finding a first-generation hybrid in a sample that's small is not what you would expect if such children were rare curiosities. It is what you would expect if meetings between these two peoples were ordinary wherever their ranges overlapped. The genomes back that up. Denisovans from the same cave carry Neanderthal ancestry from earlier crossings too. Two kinds of human shared one valley for 100,000 years, and did not treat one another as a different kind of thing. In 2025, the Denisovans finally got a face, with conditions. Two studies went at a massive fossil skull from Harbin, in northeastern China, a cranium with an enormous brow ridge, and a broad heavy face, at least 146,000 years old, given its own species name 4 years earlier. One team recovered ancient proteins from the bone, another pulled mitochondrial DNA out of the hardened plaque on its teeth. Both pointed the same way. Denisovan. A jaw dredged off the seafloor near Taiwan matched too. And here honesty matters more than a clean ending. Other specialists published formal objections to both identifications, and the original teams answered in print. The argument is live. Most extinct humans are a skull first and a story afterwards. This one ran backwards. A molecule first, then a population, then a geography, then a gene still working in living bodies, and only at the very end a face. Even the name is unsettled. Some researchers now use the formal species name that came with the Harbin skull. Others argue the group belongs inside our own species, because we interbred with them and their descendants are us. Others go on calling them after a Siberian cave, an entire branch of humanity, identified before anyone saw its face, and we are still working out what to call it.